Session is called Think More, Be More, Improving Career Decision-Making Skills, and is presented by Nakaska. So I guess first of all, you want to know if you are in the right place. So during this session, we're going to explore how practitioners can use educational theory to examine higher order thinking skills necessary for making complex career decisions. So the outcomes include we are going to be introduced to the concept of what higher order thinking skills are, demonstrate how current career theories fit into the higher order thinking model, and identify how career practitioners can help improve their clients' overall career decision-making by using more analytical and evaluative processes. Nakaska is a career consultant specializing in career decision-making. Her clients include young adults, midlife career changers, and 50-plus workers. Anne's clients are her biggest teachers, identifying gaps in current career decision-making models. She believes in strengthening client career decision-making skills through increased analysis, evaluation, and self-reflection. She is often accused of thinking too much, but does not believe that that's possible. Did you write that yourself?
Yes, I did.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so come on up, Anne, take it away.
Can you hear me? There we go. Great. Think more, be more. Okay, for those of you who love career theory and thinking and who are really nerdy, you are in the right session. For those of you who are looking for fun, you're probably in the wrong place. But those of you who are looking for a nap, this might also be the right place. So now I get to do a two-handed walk around with all kinds of stuff in my hands. At Connexus a few years ago, I heard that 1/3 of Ontario high school students spend less than 1 hour researching their career decision. That's a lot of people spending more time thinking about their grad dress, their stereo system, or possibly a new vehicle than the biggest decision that they're ever going to make in their life. If you look on your handout, on the sidebar, there is a quote by Frank Parsons. Now you have to take into account when you read this quote that Frank Parsons wrote it over 100 years ago, so it's maybe not the most flattering to young people, but the reason that I included this quote in your handout is because I wanted to point out what Parsons said, what happens when people don't make good career decisions. When they don't make good career decisions, it isn't just their lives that they impact. They also affect business. And if you affect our businesses, then you also affect our economies and our society. Career decision making is really important. And it's a decision that deserves our attention and our respect. I want to talk a little bit about the whys. Lita told you about the objectives. Before I get into that a little bit more is why. Why do we need more thinking about higher order thinking skills in career decision making? Career decision making, the decisions we make today become our resumes of tomorrow. If we don't do a good job, what happens is we end up in an area that we might not be very satisfied with. And then what happens is, as a discussion at our lunch table, is HR doesn't always like for you to move industries. Anybody had that experience where HR says, we want you to stay in the same industry? Well, what if you made a choice and you don't like that industry? So career decision making is really important. Also, career decision making is a complex problem, and it involves complex thinking skills. And I think it's time that we really appreciated that and took a deeper look at that. More importantly, career decisions, they impact our lives. The other part, too, that I think is really important to know is that the career decision-making process is the same for every level of career decision maker. You're going to be analyzing and evaluating different information if you're a high school student, and then university, and then midlife career changer or plus 50, but the process is the same for everybody. So learning how to improve that process is important for every stage of life. Lita read you my objectives, so we're going to look at higher order thinking skills, we're going to add more depth to the career decision-making process, and we're going to be looking at higher order thinking in terms of career theory and how all of this fits together, and identify where some of the gaps are. So there's a space on the second page of your handout there where I ask the questions, what are your favorite career development theories or models? Which ones do you use with your clients? And what do you think are the strengths and weaknesses? So I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to write down what your favorite career theories are and what you think their strengths and weaknesses are. And I don't want a lot of detail, but just, trait and factor theory, what do you like, what do you not like? Just 1 or 2 points, because I want you to be thinking about what career theories you use in your work with your clients. And if you don't use any career theory, this is a good reason to take the theories course that they always say that you need to get your CCDP. But I just wanted you to start thinking about that and having career theory top of your mind. This is an example of a simple problem-solving model, which a lot of career decision-making models are based on. You have a problem, you gather some information, you look at your alternatives, you make your choice, and then you put those choices into action. Most of us are familiar with this model or have seen it. What I want to bring to your attention is that it isn't just 1/3 of Ontario's high school students who take less than an hour to research their career decisions. My husband was generous enough to give me permission to share this story. This is his story of when he was finishing university. So now we have a university level person, no longer high school, and he did what most university students do. They had the companies who come onto campus. They interviewed people. They asked you to submit your resumes. He did that to 5 or 6 companies. 2 of them brought him in for interviews. He chose one, and then he went to work for them. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. Okay, so what if we used higher order thinking to help my husband and any of us who, if that example reminds you of your own career decision-making process, then this will be useful for you as well. So in higher order thinking, we have 3 levels. We have the knowledge level with remembering, understanding, and applying. We have an analysis and evaluation level. And then when we get into really higher order thinking, we're talking about synthesis and creating opportunities. You don't need to write this because I have printed this all out on your handout. So for the next 3 slides with this big definition of higher order thinking, you already have it right in front of you. So what I want you to know about it is that it is an educational model. And I think that's important to sort of keep tucked in the back of our minds. It comes from Bloom's taxonomy. That's where it was originally developed from. And the idea is that some types of learning require more cognitive processing than others. And I think we can all agree that career development skills are something that people need to learn. In Bloom's taxonomy, for example, we're looking at analysis, evaluation, and synthesis are all thought to be of a higher order than, say, just listing out, say, multiplication tables, right? If you just have the data or the information, that's a very simple level of knowledge, but then when you start to do stuff with it, that becomes higher order thinking. And different skills require different learning and teaching methods as well. Higher order thinking involves learning complex judgmental skills such as critical thinking and problem solving, which of course I think we can all agree ties into career decision making because it involves a lot of those skills. And lastly, it's more difficult to learn and to teach, but it's more valuable because this is how we take the knowledge that we have and apply it to new novel situations, which means that every time that we're faced with a new career decision or career problem in our life, we can take the old skills that we have and apply them forward. But if we don't have very many skills in that toolbox and we haven't learned very many, then we don't have a lot to take with us when we move forward, when we have other career problems. So we're going to start at the bottom of that triangle, the knowledge place. Parsons talked about knowledge. Most of us are familiar. Parsons is the grandfather of career development, and he talked about that you needed knowledge about yourself and you needed knowledge about industry. So the first step is to remember. You're given a bunch of information, like today you were given a bunch of information. The next sort of step to that is how much of it do you remember or recall? And we can do exercises and help people learn how to do that better. Then we move to understanding, and that means that we comprehend and that we construct our own meaning with the information now. So now we're starting to play with that information, and that includes interpreting, exemplifying, classifying, summarizing, inferring, comparing, and explaining. And all of this is in your notes as well. Now, here's an important differentiation. We know that when we do a lot of assessments, we're doing a lot of comparing. Would you rather be a baker or a builder? Or would you rather be a manager or a stock boy? When we just do the comparing, that's understanding. But when we look at the comparison and we start to figure out why we make one choice over the other, then that starts to become part of analysis and evaluation, which is a higher order thinking skill. That's another piece of information we need to keep tucked in the back of our mind when we're looking at career development. The third part of knowledge is being able to take what you learn, play with it a bit, and then start to apply it in other situations. So let's go back to my husband, David, and what if he had been taught more higher order thinking skills as applicable to career decision making? So what that looks like is that in high school when he chose his options, or in junior high, and he was taken through a process where he examined his options, then thought about them, figured out and evaluated at the end of the year which ones were good choices, which ones weren't good choices, how to make better decisions in the next year, then took that information, chose his options, and then evaluated that at the end of the year. You can see that he would have had a lot of practice throughout with higher order thinking skills, and he would have been able to take the skills from high school and now start applying them to university. So what if in every year in post-secondary, he asked himself these questions while he was in his courses? What courses do I like? What parts of the courses do I like? And what parts don't I like? So where could I do the work that I like to do? So now you're starting to take the work from the courses and you're taking it and putting it into industry. So what industries or companies of work that do the work that I like to do? And then start exploring those companies and then potentially even applying to those, or at least watching their job postings and their websites. So in gathering data, he's starting to remember. He's remembering himself and his interests, the occupations that relate to his coursework, and companies that do that work. He's summarizing the coursework and the interests, and he's also studying how his studying relates to outside in the world of work. And this, if you asked him, he could explain too why he was making those choices. So you can see how each of that takes you to a higher level of thinking and reasoning. That's just the knowledge piece. But you can already see that just even in that knowledge piece, that is more than what most people do in their career decision making in high school and post-secondary. And even further on, because I work with midlife career changers and plus 50, and a lot of them do not do any of this level of information gathering or researching. Next, we're going to talk about that middle peer, the analyzing and evaluation. So analyzing is when we break things down, and we're taking a look at it, and now we're comparing and contrasting, but it's at a much deeper level. So we're differentiating, we're starting to organize that information that we get, and we're starting attributing certain qualities to it. And the evaluating is the judging piece, the value of the materials, understanding what's valuable and important to us. And the method's given, and it's based on a criteria as well. And that includes checking and critiquing what we look at. So for David, what that means is that maybe he starts differentiating which companies and work appeals to him the most. Maybe he starts prioritizing it and making a list. Then he starts organizing those companies that he's going to follow on a regular basis for the job opportunities. Then maybe he's checking in with himself too and seeing, well, I was interested in this in my first and second year, but am I still interested in it in my third and fourth year now? And he's evaluating and critiquing his choices by comparing them to his values and also some of the other choices that he made. How many of your clients are doing this kind of level of information gathering and analysis and evaluation? Very few. And that's the reason why I thought it was important to talk about higher order thinking. And now, what if we take it up to even a higher level? And what I really liked about all the sessions this morning is that they tied in so nicely with this whole presentation, because we're going to be talking about creating your own opportunities. So this is taking different pieces and elements from different places and kind of reorganizing them into a whole brand new whole and creating a new structure. So this includes generating, planning, and producing. So David might plan where he wants to go and lead his career over the next 5 years. He might start generating a new list of careers that he wants to follow. And he might be thinking about new opportunities altogether that don't even exist. So he might be thinking, you know what, I think I'm going to do research in computer science and thermodynamics. That's creating new opportunities. And that we talked about this morning, where you take what you know and create something completely new, and you create your own position and your own job. To me, that's where the magic happens too, and that's why I think this is so important. So you can see that if all of our clients started doing this, they would become much stronger career decision makers. They would become better career planners, more informed employees, and most likely happier and more successful workers. And that's part of what Richard spoke to as well. Because I think one of the pieces that he spoke to is people not understanding themselves well enough in their careers, which means the manager maybe shouldn't have even been a manager, and the employee too needs to have done more research ahead of time and known, is this the company that I want to work for? And to be able to recognize very quickly whether or not this is where he or she wants to be. But this is also really important on the business side and the society side and on economics as well, because we want to reduce that amount of time that people spend disengaged in school and work. And we heard about that today. 4 times, was it 4 times or 5 times the cost? 5 times the cost. Okay, so this isn't just affecting our client, it is affecting business, and it's affecting bottom line. And do we want businesses spending money on doing turnover, or do we want businesses spending money on employees and salaries and training and all the good stuff that we would like to have from companies? Or reinvesting in the economy, all those things that businesses do. So now, how does career theory address each of these areas of higher order thinking? So what I'd like you to think about is, given the little bit of information I've given you about higher order thinking, start thinking about which career theories address which parts of higher order thinking. So basically what we're going to be doing is higher order thinking on career theory. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to either write some notes down on the page, on your page 2, or if you want to talk about it in the group because you like to discuss and talk with people, you can do that too. Trait and factor theory. So that's the place we're going to start. Chris Magnuson would say that Parsons has formed the cornerstone of trait and factor theory. Basically, knowledge of self, knowledge of the demands and requirements of the workplace, and the true reasoning that bring these two together, otherwise known as matching. How many of you are familiar with trait and factor theory? And how many of you use a version of trait and factor theory somewhere in your work? So a few people. I chose Holland's work to look at, the self-directed search and his dictionary of Holland's occupational codes. How many of you have actually seen Holland's dictionary? So 1 or 2. It's like this thick. It's a big encyclopedia. What I did is I took the theory and then colored in the sections of basically the triangle. So I put the knowledge of self and the knowledge of industry at the bottom. I put analyzing and evaluation next, and then I put the creation piece up at the top. Lita is handing out a handout that does a beautiful summary to describe what areas each career development theory covers. So Holland tends to address the self and industry, but not a lot. It looks at some industry choices, it looks at some interest areas, but certainly not everything. It doesn't do a lot of analysis. And it certainly doesn't do a lot of creating your own opportunities. If we're looking at assessments, then what we find is there's a lot of different assessments, and they look at different pieces of the self. How many of you are using interest inventories with your clients? Okay, so about a quarter. What about aptitude testing?
Doing several different things.
Okay. And what about personality assessments? Okay. So some of the questions we need to ask ourselves from a higher order thinking perspective when we're using higher order thinking to think about career theory is, what are the assessments actually assessing? How much knowledge of self will we gain from using this assessment? If it only looks at personality, then that's all we're looking at. If it only does interests, then that's all we're looking at. And if it only does aptitudes, that's all we're looking at. And you can include that for any of the assessments. The next piece that we need to look at is, what about the career choices? And certainly today we saw about all the information that's coming in this digital age and how much the workplace is changing. When we do an assessment, does it cover those new industry areas? We also need to think about how many job titles are there in the National Occupation Classification. We're looking at like 35,000 job titles. How many job titles are we assessing and comparing when we do an assessment? Just like a sliver. And how many industries or job titles, does the assessment cover? So in trait and factor theory, what I've said is we're looking at the self, we're looking a bit at industry, but it leaves a lot to be desired when it comes to the analysis piece or about creating new opportunities. And it leaves a bit to be desired too around industry and self. However, it does touch on industry, and it is one of the points actually that I give to trait and factor theory, because it's one of the few career theories actually that touches a lot on industry. And I think industry is a very important piece, especially in higher order thinking skills that we need to know about. When I was looking more and more into this work and thinking about how people make decisions, what I recognized too is that, have you ever had a client that's done the assessment and it's come back and it said, you should be an undertaker? And then they go, where in the world did that come from? Anybody hear of those situations or have done an assessment on themselves and gone, where was that coming from? The reason that happens, the reason there is such a disconnect between when we take the test and our result is because it is the assessment doing the analyzing and the evaluating. Yeah, exactly. So then what happens is we're not getting it. We're not the one playing with, would I rather do this or this more? And oh, this one showed up 5 times and this one only showed up 2 times. We're not seeing that. Now, sometimes we get our score back on the chart, but in many ways too, that's not the same as kind of handling it and actually doing the sorting. Now, Richard Nodell has card sorts. Is anybody familiar with those? So a few people. That's actually one of the beauties of the card sorts, because you can sort it all out and then you can actually look at your results and go, not quite right, and then you shift and you change them and you do the different prioritizing. And that's using a lot more of that analysis and evaluation skills. Now, what about Donald Super's work? Any Super fans here? I heard his name being mentioned down in the, so I know a few people know about Super's work. So Super looks after the developmental stages and what we tend to be doing in our career at different developmental stages and the roles that we take on. Now with Super, he does a lot of analysis around the self and what we're doing around our career decision-making process, and he does a lot of work around the analysis piece. That when we're in this role in our life, what are the career decisions that we're making, what's our situation, and how does that impact us? And then he also looks at values and stuff, and he does the same thing in terms of roles as well. What different roles are we doing within our life? Are we retired, or are we working, or are we just, new and maybe starting a family? What are our roles? That's a big piece of his work. So I've colored in the self and the analysis and evaluation much darker to say that Super tends to cover those pieces quite well. Now, if you just do that part of Super's theory, then you're going to miss out on a big part of the industry piece. So he also does the career development inventory, which is, there's 5 pieces to it, and some of that is how much do you know about industry, and what are your industry preferences? That's where industry gets covered with Super's work. So he does a little bit of it, but not a lot. And I know when a lot of people who work with Super's theory tends to use it more in terms of roles. They really like the rainbow piece and getting people to think about their roles and development. How many are fans of constructivism? Mark Savickas' work. So yes, we got somebody very enthusiastically over there. I find people who like constructivism, they love constructivism. So in constructivism, the constructivists said, this trait and factor thing is great, but it really does a disservice to people. It's minimizing them down to a few questions on an assessment, and people are much bigger and deeper and more wonderful than that. And they are. So Savickas and other constructivists look a lot more at values and purpose and the deeper things that drive us in our career choices and our career selections. Some of the techniques that they use are laddering, storytelling, and a lot of the narrative approach. What is your story? What do you want your story to be? Writing a chapter in your life. All those kinds of exercises, star stories. So you might not be familiar with constructivist theory, but you might be using a lot of constructivist techniques in your work. How many people are using star stories and that kind of stuff in their work? Yeah, so way more constructivists all of a sudden their hands go up. Really good for analyzing and evaluating. It goes much deeper in terms of who you are, self-reflection, and a lot more emphasis on our purpose and our values in our life. Now, what happens though with constructivism, and when I've attended sessions presented by constructivists, I'll say, well, this is all great, but then how do you choose what you're going to do with this wonderful self of yours? And they go, yeah, that's kind of a problem. So the industry piece is not necessarily covered. How many fans of John Crumbolt's and happenstance theory? So yes, some more people who love Crumbolt's. So social learning theory, so you would think social learning theory would fit more into higher order thinking skills, and it does, because it does a lot more of analyzing and encouraging you to explore new opportunities. And the big piece of chaos theory and happenstance theory is what we learned about today, that adaptability piece. Crumbolt's talked about taking advantage of opportunity when it comes. So an opportunity comes your way, you should say yes. Another opportunity comes your way, you should say yes. Because this is going to teach you all kinds of stuff about yourself and all kinds of stuff about industry. And that's true. But it's also, which is my biggest beef about Crumbolt's, is that you can waste a lot of time because it's not always intentional learning. And it's not always going to take you to a place that's going to help you long term. Is this an opportunity that's good for you? How do you know? And this is why I think higher order thinking is so important, because the more that we know ourselves, the more that we know industry, the more we can recognize what is a great opportunity and what is a distraction. And I often talk about that with my clients. They'll say, this job came up, blah, 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 because as they're working on their career development, all of a sudden, all kinds of stuff starts coming up, right? And I say, okay, so we've talked about your long-term career plan, and this is what you're saying, this is where you say you want to be in 5 years or whatever. Do you think this opportunity will get you there, or is it just going to be a distraction? And I think that's a question that we need to start asking a lot more. Because oftentimes what they'll say is, you know, I think I would only work there for a couple of years and then I think I'd be looking again for something else. But it was exciting because somebody wanted us. So Crumbolt's and Chaos Theory by Jim Bright is really good for analyzing and evaluating and learning a lot more. I want to talk to the luck, because Crumbolt's theory is a lot about making your own luck. What I want to propose is that what we think of as serendipity, oh, I was at this networking event and this person was talking to me and they said, you would just be the perfect person for us, right? Luck and serendipity. How did this happen? How it happened is that we're those two green circles, what we know about us and what we know about industry. And the person who says, you're my person, is the person who knows the business. They get their business, they know what they're looking for, so when they see you, they recognize what they need in their business. That's not luck. That's them knowing their business. And we need to know our business so that we can recognize what is a really good, lucky opportunity that comes our way. Cognitive information processing, probably no one has heard of that theory at all. Or if they did, it was a long time ago in, anybody? Anybody information? Yes, a couple. Okay, this comes out of the University of Florida, and you would think that this would be almost identical to higher order thinking, which I thought that it was, but it comes from two different places. This comes from counseling. This comes from psychology and cognitive psychology and how we think about thinking. So the people in Florida talk about, what do you know about yourself? What do you know about industry? That sounds familiar. And then, how do we make a decision? And they teach people how to make better decisions. And then the top piece of their triangle is, now what do I think about my decision making? So it does get into a lot more heavy analysis around career decision making. I like to think of it as the higher order thinking of career decision making. Not necessarily higher order thinking of industry or higher order thinking about yourself, but definitely higher order thinking about the career decision making process. And it teaches us to be better career decision makers. That being said, it gives us a little bit more information about self, but they tend to use assessments and finding out knowledge about self, and doesn't cover as much information about industry as it could. That brings us back to Parsons. And I bring Parsons back in because Parsons actually gets summarized down to like one sentence. Know yourself, know industry, and put those together and do matching. But in actual fact, Parsons wanted us to do a lot more higher order thinking than what his work has gotten drilled down to. What he says in his book is that in a wise choice of vocation, there are three broad factors. So the first one is a clear understanding of yourself. But he says that includes your aptitudes, your abilities, your interests, your ambitions, your resources, your limitations, and their causes. How many of our clients are really truly examining their limitations and the causes and then working on those? So when we look at this, this is a picture of all those different things that Parsons talks about. We have all that information that we need about ourselves to make a good career decision. That's a lot of variables. And then he said, second of all, we need knowledge of requirements, conditions of success, advantages, disadvantages, compensation, opportunities, and prospects in different lines of work. How many of our clients know that much about specific industries and companies that they're looking at? That's a lot of information, and I've put that in a picture as well. So on the one hand, you've got all these variables that people need to know and all the information they need to know about themselves. And then on the other hand, you've got all this information about industry that we need to know and understand. And then he said, you should use true reasoning. And he was very specific about using scientific reasoning to look at how these two are related. But what I think is the most important piece that Parsons says is, have you found out in what direction your chief abilities and in what line you are best adapted to achieve success? What Parsons said wasn't just matching, taking, oh, I'm interested in this, and they do that, so that's a good fit. What he is saying is that you should know enough about in different industries so that when you look at yourself, you can say, where's the place you would adapt to the most, where you would achieve the most success? That's not matching. That's higher order thinking skills. That's really having a good understanding and a good analysis of both ourselves and industry. And when you look at all the information that we've gotten this weekend about how industry is changing, we know that we need way more information about all of that. So now we have all this information, what are we going to do with it? And what's important is that we still have some more analyzing to do. Where are the gaps? We need to look at information for ourselves and also for our clients in terms of credibility. Where are the good sources of information? If a college or a university tells you this is a great program and everybody gets hired, should we just accept that as, yeah, that's the truth? Or do we need to go and talk to employers too? And what about job snobbery? Where we have biases about different industries, and so we aren't even considering them, even though they might be a good choice. And I see a bunch of nodding, so people are very aware of that. And This has really changed. So and this comes up in our values. So what our parents valued and what we might value are going to be very different. When I was growing up, I remember distinctly my dad saying, "You need to go to school because do you want to be a garbage collector?" That was like, not a job that you wanted. But if you think now about how much money is involved in the waste management industry, we actually might want to be garbage collectors. When I was growing up, if you couldn't go on to university or whatever, you would be a truck driver because you didn't even need to finish high school to do that. And that was also considered like a very lowly job. And now, logistics and supply chain management and transportation is a huge industry. And that's how things change, and we need to re-examine our beliefs and values around jobs and industry. Gray Pinnell did a great session on values conflict and how that will also impact our career decision making as well. It's another area we need to look at, and it's not covered by most career theory. So one of the big pieces that I think is really important for us to understand, and I think we need to make a shift in our perspective and how we look at career development, and also how we sell ourselves in terms of our worth and our value. And that is the difference between using a counseling lens and an education lens. If you think about it, people come to us when they have a career problem, right? That model, the problem, then gather the information, blah, blah, blah. If you think about how I walked you through David's example of what he could have been doing, it's a lot more of a process that is continually happening and growing and developing, and that he's learning more and more steps in. Career development came from counseling. And when I'm reading a lot of the theories, they talk about that. They talk about the career problem that the client is dealing with. And then what happens is the clients come to us with their problem, and then in this very short window of time while they're trying to deal with their problem, we try and teach them and throw as much career development at them as we possibly can, and try and cram it all in this short little window of time while they're desperate and open and willing to listen to any of it. And we need to switch that and think about career development as a process. It is a process that is looking at and solving huge career decision-making issues that impact industry and our economy and people's lives and their livelihoods and their children's livelihoods. This is important work, and it demands the time and the attention and the learning and the thinking that we should be giving it. And we need to be the promoters of that out to industry and to government, to nonprofits, to everyone, because we need to be the teachers of career development. One of the areas that is a huge gap that I see in career development theory is industry. Our clients do not know enough about industry, and I find this with every single age I work with. There is so much about how they didn't know all the options that were open to them. And they can't create new opportunities for themselves if they don't understand industry. What do they need to know about industry? A lot of what we were talking about today, Lisa Taylor's session, Richard's session, your session, everybody's session just spoke to this, the learning panel. It was like, yes, how to prep my audience. I was so pleased with everybody's presentation. We need to understand the changing workplace. William Bridges' work, Job Shift. Daniel Pink's work, A Whole New Mind, all about how the workplace is changing. The gig economy, Knowing and understanding the gig economy is so important for plus 50 workers because they're still looking for full-time jobs. And this gig economy scares them to death, even though they did it back in the 60s when they were kids and they got babysitting money or they mowed a lawn, or like they're used to doing, they did gig economy way back when they were kids, and then they kind of forgot how to do it. What are the factors impacting the workplace? And industry trends, we talked about that. And I'm just going to check in with our time here. Okay, I think we're good. So one of the industry trends I want to share with you is Forbes had their 100-year anniversary issue in the fall. And they compared what were the top industries of the top 50 companies in 1917, 1967, and 2017. And I think that the States is kind of, we're kind of a microcosm of the States and what they do. It's kind of reflected a little bit in what we do. It wouldn't surprise you that in 1967 that oil and gas was the leading industry in the States. 10 out of 50 companies were oil and gas companies. Now 2017 was a whole nother matter. So where do you think oil and gas has shifted in the last 50 years? And you have to remember, if anybody's in touch with the news of what's going on in oil and gas in the US, it's booming. Like, it's not like here. It's gone crazy. So where do you think oil and gas is now? Any guesses? Second, third? Sorry?
Top 10.
It is in the top 10, yeah. So give me a number, anybody, give me a number. 4. Okay, pretty close. Oil and gas is 6th, and agriculture is 7th. So our two biggest industries are number 6 and 7. And that doesn't mean that they're not doing well. What it means is they have been bypassed by 5 other industries. And the number 1 is technology. There are only 3 oil and gas companies now in the top 50 US companies. The top 6 companies, 5 are tech companies. What's the reason we didn't get the Amazon bid? Not enough technology. And we, as a society, and Albertans and Calgarians, we need to be thinking about that. Financial services was there, conglomerates were there, telecommunications were there. So we need to be thinking about those trends and sharing them with our clients too, so that they understand that the landscape is shifting and changing, because they may not be aware of it. Why it's so important to understand industry? Because we're competing globally. And we need to better understand how we can be of service to the workplace, and we need to help find more satisfying work, help our clients find more satisfying work, and to be able to see what work opportunities are specifically suited to us. If we don't understand the business that we're in, we are not going to succeed. And we're not going to know which are the best companies to be working for if we haven't done our research. And yet, we take it back to that very first slide, 1/3 of high school students are spending less than an hour researching a career decision. I believe the reason that they do that is because thinking about what you're going to do with the rest of your life is so huge, which those 2 pictures of Parsons' work and all those variables that we have to consider and think about when we make this decision, I think it's anxiety producing. And I think that we just avoid it. Well, my friend's dad has this company and he's given me this opportunity, so I'll go work there. And they don't even really know if that's an industry of interest or not. And so then the decision that they make today impacts their resume, and then they have a resume that they're not really happy with, and then what do you do when you look for a job? Well, you're supposed to go and look for jobs where you have experience. But if you don't like the experience that you have, now what? So now you're starting all over again, which is Super's theory of recycling. And now we're back in the exploration stage. But what happens in a study put out by Connexus and CIRIC is that people might be familiar with career services in high school, and that's about 60%. 50% are familiar with post-secondary career services, and then after that, it's like 20% of the population is familiar with career services that we offer and that they're actually an option. So it means there's a lot of people out there that don't even understand that we're available to help them out and that we can do things for them. The other piece where there's a real weakness is in creating opportunities, and you did a wonderful speech about creating opportunities. And if we're going to create new opportunities for ourselves, then we need to understand and know about factors impacting the workplace, keeping up with industry, and recognizing potential opportunities. I'll give you a quick example of this. When I was working in oil and gas, I was a joint venture auditor. I had my first baby. I didn't want to go back to work after my mat leave. But I did want to work part-time. So I approached my employer and said, I know that we often get audits at the end of the year that don't fit in our audit schedule, that we don't have time to do, but they need to be done because the timing on it is running out. I said, I would like to come back and do contract work on those audits we get that you can't handle with your department. And because I knew the job, because I knew the work, my boss said yes. And so that was at Dome Petroleum, for some of you who are old enough to remember that company. I had worked at Hudson's Bay before that, and my previous boss had gone out on his own contracting, and I said to him, I would like to work contract. So I worked contract for him too. That job did not exist. That is creating an opportunity for myself. And the more we know our business, that's an example of how we can create the opportunity that fits for us. We need to be shifting from thinking about jobs and job search to thinking about finding the work. And that's what William Bridges talks about in his book, Job Shift, that was written back like in 1994, but is still so incredibly relevant today. How do you look for work opportunities? One of the best places is look for the problems in your industry. What are the problems plaguing your industry? So if we said oil and gas, what are the problems plaguing oil and gas right now? Well, people are complaining about plastics, and people are complaining about leaking pipelines, and people are complaining about not cleaning up well sites. All those problems are potentials for work opportunities. And they're potential for people who have oil and gas experience to be creating work and jobs around those particular problems. So the challenge now is, what are your favorite career development theories or models to use with your clients? And how could you add more higher order thinking skills to what you're doing with your clients? So if you want to spend a couple of minutes there with your group discussing that. So what I want us to start thinking about, and often people are already using a combination of career theories. How many people are using a combination of career theories? So yeah, a number of you. If you think about taking each one of the theories that we learned and kind of, if you remember transparencies, how many people remember transparencies? I'm giving away my age. If you can just kind of layer each theory and what it does for higher order thinking skills, one on top of each other, what we would see is that it actually, when we take all the theories and put them all together and overlap them, we get a far more comprehensive model of what career decision making and career planning should look like. And that's what I'm going to propose, is that we actually start combining all the theories together, taking all the good stuff from all of them and using all of it with our clients, that we should be doing all that work. I'm thrilled to death that K through 12 is having career development in the classroom now, half an hour every day, technology and careers. Woohoo, finally.
And where is this?
Here in Alberta. I have a friend who's a teacher, and she,
What are you talking
oh, okay. Well, she's in elementary school and she does half an hour. And they integrate, and somebody else was talking about it. Was it Carrie Burness? How many people have career development being integrated into their schools? So a few. No, not COM. This is different than COM. This is with little kids. So for example, if you do a section on like the weather, then they're going to talk about jobs around the weather, like climatology and meteorology. So Lita, you familiar with that too? No. Okay. So I'm not sure if it's just the one school that integrated it, but yeah, no, she was, this is grade 1, they were talking about it, which I thought was really cool, and that they're bringing it into their school. So it could be that it's in the process and hasn't hit all the schools yet. And I heard that they were working on it. I'm pretty sure Carrie Burness had talked about a project a couple of years ago that was what they were doing. They were trying to bring it into the school system. I see some nodding, no, yes? Okay, maybe I dreamt it because I'm hoping. I am hoping for this. So if we think of higher order skills and overlaying that, the knowledge and the analysis and the evaluation and creating opportunities, and that if we take and integrate all of that information, that we'll come up with more thorough theory that we can work with our students. And Glenda asked me the question, she said, I work with high school students, and part of the issue is that they're just like, they just don't know what they're interested in, and they don't have any experience, and people are nodding, yes, yes, yes. Okay, here's how I work with my students. So first of all, people know way more about what they're interested in than they actually know. The problem is that oftentimes we are forcing PDM, premature decision making. The vast majority of high school students are not ready to make a decision. But we keep asking the question, what are you going to do? We need to change that question. What are you exploring? What kind of job are you thinking of getting part-time that might add to your experience of something that you might like to do in the future? So one of the first things I do to help people look at industry is I actually don't focus on job titles. I actually look at the big picture of all the industries, and I take out that very first page of the National Occupation Classification Codes. And if you don't like the 10 that are listed there, you can go to ONET, which is the American site, and you can look at the 16 career clusters. Either one, it works really well. It is really tough to choose a job you want to do 1 out of 35,000 job titles. But it's really easy to choose 3 industries that you're interested in out of 10. Think 3 out of 10 is easier than like 1 out of 35,000 to choose? And then what I get them to do is to say, if you're interested in this industry, which industry would you first like to explore? So let's say they even want to go into medicine. Okay, so what's something that they could do in grade 10 where they could start thinking about medicine? Well, they could volunteer at the hospital or a senior's home. Something as simple as working in a drugstore. Because if you're working in a drugstore, you're going to meet pharmacists and pharmacist assistants, and you're going to see a whole bunch of different medical supplies and companies, and so it will start to expose you to the industry. And then you can think about, well, did you like that or not like that? We can also ask them questions about, what did you like better, biology or physics? Chemistry or math? They know. When I work with my clients and I say, and did you like math? And they go, no, I hated math. Blah, blah, blah. And lots of times they feel kind of obligated that they should say that they're interested in something because you should be interested in science or whatever. And I say, you don't have to be interested in it, just be honest and tell me what you're really interested in. And so by taking them through and walking through that process, we can come up with a list pretty simply. If they like biology, then we ask them the question, well, do you like botany better or learning about plants, or do you like zoology better? And this helps them start to do that analysis for themselves too. And so we need to help them break down and start to classify and examine and analyze and evaluate what they're really interested in. And so then when they come around to grade 11, we ask them at the end of grade 10, say, well, analyze all the courses that you took in grade 10. And which courses and what parts of those courses did you find interesting? And then spend some time searching on the web. My goodness, they don't even have to get dressed to go to the library like we did. They just sit there in their jammies and their computer, and they can look at all kinds of companies. Who is hiring people in biology? There's biostatisticians, there's biotechnology, you can go into medicine, all kinds of medical fields. There's all kinds of stuff in biology that you can look at. Or you can do the plant side instead and do gardening and horticulture and all of that stuff. So it gets them thinking about what they really like to do and analyzing it and breaking it down. And we can start anywhere. We can start with giving them an assessment first and then get them to do some of that analysis. We can just get them to sit down and do more of like stories with constructivism. What's important is that we teach them that analysis and evaluation piece. Always. What do you like to do? What do you not like to do? How can you do more of what you like to do and less of what you don't like to do? And if we teach them just that one simple skill, then they will be so much more prepared when they are midlife career changers and when they are plus 50 workers, because they will be in the habit of analyzing what they like to do and what they don't like to do. And then what happens is patterns start to appear. When I work with my clients, what happens is, if they like doing biology, they were probably interested in biology from the time that they were little. I liked going and seeing the animals when I went walking for walks with my parents. And then what did they like next? They liked looking after their pet. And then they liked studying biology. It just kind of goes all the way along. And the more you can get them to identify all those interests all the way along in their life, then what ends up happening is that when they go into a job interview, they can say that. They can say those things too. They can say, I've always been interested in animals. And so then if they're applying to vet school or whatever, they've got the whole story because we've helped them with that story and their interests. And I think that's a really important piece. And even if they can't be a vet, well, what else can they do in animal health technology? Or is that just something that they want to do as a hobby? So I think there's lots of different ways that we can help them and approach with them and get them to practice. And also getting them how many students can and can't afford education. I do a real simple equation. If students start working in grade 9 or grade 10, and they work 1 day a week, from then, and then, so 3 years of working 1 day a week. That's not working the whole summer, and that's not working both days on the weekend or other evenings or anything. Just that, just 1 day a week. And they save like $250 a week or whatever it amounts out to. They end up with like $10,000 at the end of 3 years. And that's not even saving all the money that they make. So almost any student can have money towards education. We just have to start helping them learn what they can do to help themselves. And it's about what you said, that taking advantage of opportunities. So I don't tell my students, well, you should get a job at McDonald's. When I used to come in and do the mock interviews for the comm program, and I'm just checking our time. We got 1 minute. They have to write their resume for a pretend job that they're applying for, and they're applying, to work at the Bay, but they like sports. And I say, well, have you thought about applying to the Saddle Dome, or have you thought about applying at McMahon Stadium, or at the soccer center, or at Sport Check? And something that simple has never crossed their mind. Because they're just looking for the job. And we need to help direct them towards their interests, and that saying that there's a lot of opportunities. So these are the people that I think should go and work at McDonald's. If you're interested in a career in customer service, go work at McDonald's. If you're interested in the restaurant industry, go work at McDonald's. If you're interested in the hospitality industry, go work at McDonald's. And if you're not, then find another entry-level position that's more in line with your interests. And that helps them build up their resume, because in grade 10, they could look at one industry and do a job in one particular industry, an entry-level job, and then they could go and do another entry-level job in a different industry, and then they could do a third entry-level position in another industry. And at the end of high school, with just working 1 day a week, they could have built up experience in 3 different industries. Very simple. And I think that's part of our responsibility to help them. Does that answer your question, plus way more? Because, yeah, blah, 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 blah. So I think that brings us to the end. Higher order thinking, we can think of it as transfer of knowledge. We can think of it as critical thinking and believing what to believe or to do. And this is the one I like best, is higher order thinking as problem solving, because a problem is a goal that cannot be met with a memorized answer. And many problems are open-ended. And if one question is open-ended, what do you want to do with your life, is the biggest open-ended question we'll ever get. And higher order thinking will help us with that. So thank you very much. Think more, plan more, to be more. Share that with your students. And I'm going to say the same thing as Richard. I'd love to come in and talk to your groups about this exact same topic. Thank you very much.